So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Grants 101 for Georgia's Local Officials, a 12-part webinar series brought to you by GMA and the Georgia Association of Regional Commissions. This is our fourth webinar, if you can believe it. I'm Claire Chan with GMA. Before we begin today's event, just a reminder that you are participating in this webinar in listen-only mode. We encourage you to use the chat, as many already have, as well as the Q&A functions in Zoom. If you would like to submit a question for either of our presenters, just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to add a comment, please use the chat button. To access materials from today's webinar, as well as past webinars, please click the link in the chat that I will put in there shortly. You will also receive a follow-up email with the materials and more information. So without further ado, let's turn things over to Amanda Day and Kimberly Hayes-Demuga of Heyday Services. Take it away, Amanda and Kimberly.
All righty, so Amanda is going to be sharing her screen. I'm so grateful to GMA and to Amanda because I can just sit and look at pictures and talk to y'all. So my life is pretty sweet. And I'd like to also welcome all y'all to fourth in the series of 12, and we're going to be talking about where are you going to find those grants, aka grant prospect research and how to read RFPs, also known as the instruction manuals for grants. And we do have a lot of topics to cover. So if you are new to this series, welcome. If you have been with us at the beginning, this is the part where we're going to go to the next slide and talk about who we are. So feel free to get a sip of water or whatever you need to do while we do that. But if you're new, we're going to tell you that we've been doing this for a long time. A combined 50 years of grants and fundraising experience. Amanda and I have both started out as part of a team, Amanda in local government and me in health and human services and education organizations that were nonprofits. So between us, we cover a lot of ground, and we're hoping to share that with you and also encourage y'all in the chat to not only share where you're from, but there could be ways that you might see some potential collaborations, because I'm very happy collaborating with Amanda. So I feel like people should look for good collaborations. Got a few house rules here. Again, using the chat to connect. And then if you have specific questions, you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and hold your cursor over that. You'll be able to see a Q&A with little thought bubbles. Click on that, put your questions in there. That way we'll know that that is a question versus you're agreeing or disagreeing in the chat, or you're trying to figure out who's working on what. So that helps it, that it helps the flow keep going. And GMA, as Claire mentioned, was going to make the slides and handouts available to you through the magic of email. And this is being recorded, as you know, and this will be a part of the GMA resource library for future reference. So all 12 episodes will be handled the same way. So while y'all are getting settled in, we're just going to jump right in. And I think maybe the question, if you're not asking this question, I'm pretty sure someone you report to or another official may be asking this question. How do we need this money? Where are we going to get the money? Or they may turn it around and say, there's lots of federal money out there. Why aren't you getting that federal money that's out there? Because there's millions. I hear about it every day. I'm not going to ask you to put in the chat whether you fall into either one of those categories, because we want to just keep it comfortable and nice. But you could ask questions for a friend. So maybe you have a friend who's experiencing this kind of thing. And if your friend is experiencing that, you could put friend in the chat, and we'll just know that you have a friend that's getting some pressure to find grants. And Amanda has thoughtfully provided the photo here of the hammer and the nail. And we all know the proverb about that. If, all you have is a hammer, that's the only tool that you have, and everything, everything takes a nail. Not necessarily the case, particularly when it comes to looking for grants. We want to walk you through some places to look, right? Because that's important, but also sort of inject some ideas for sort of critical thinking around that, and ways to help you educate up is what we call it, when you are helping people that maybe you work with or report to or volunteer with, however it works, to help them understand how it works and how grants are truly transformative, but they're not the solution for every single issue that you might be facing for the communities you serve in the municipalities and counties you serve. So I also wanted to go over sort of an idea of how much money is out there. And so you'll see in the next slide, and again, this is CY is calendar year, FY is fiscal year. Those are our abbreviations. And so this is, Amanda, I think this is based on federal grant awards at the bottom, and then the top 2 calendar years. Is that from Grant Writing USA, or is that also federal?
That's from Giving USA.
Got it.
The data.
Yeah. And so Giving USA. So you'll see that, so the top 2 with the CY 2022, those are all about, as you can see, corporate and foundation giving in the billions, which is exciting, billion with a B. But if you look on down to fiscal year 2022 there at the bottom, that's 1.08 trillion with a T. So there is a lot of money out there. People who are bursting into your office saying there's all this money out there. There's money out there. It's finding the right fit and all of that so that you are making the best use of your time and resources, putting together a complex proposal that will help you get the grants you need to do the good work that you want to do. So this is not something where it's a one size fits all. And so we're just going to keep reiterating that. That's one of the best things you can do to help people understand. Even one agency is going to have federal agency. It's going to have multiple grants, and it's going to require one application for each thing. And what they ask for each program or each grant cycle could be very different, right? And so it's your job. We're going to help you get there to make it a big part of your job to suss out which opportunities are really going to be the right fit. So this is not a strategy where it's like, it's a numbers game. Apply to as many grants as possible and we'll get a few. That's how it works a little bit in individual giving, maybe, you know, if around Christmas time you get all those envelopes from different nonprofits in your mailbox wanting end of the year giving, because believe it or not, direct mail is still like a really strong thing that works. They're sending it out to everybody who's ever expressed interest, or maybe they're buying mailing lists and they're sending out the same message, which works in that arena. But as you well know, grants require specificity per grant and eligibility for the grant, but also the best fit. So it's sort of like, just because you're eligible to apply doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do at that time. We're all going to be talking about that a little bit more later, and we've addressed it in some other of our webinars. But for now, I think Amanda's going to take over and just talk about some, or it may be a review for some of y'all, but grants.gov, the free.gov site, so you know it's coming directly from the federal government and where you can go. This is, I think, Amanda, you would agree, this is one of the most trusted places to go and look for actual grant opportunities.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when it comes to grant prospect research, trying to find the right grant to fit the programs and needs that your city or your county has, grants.gov is, for most of us, the first place we go. I'm not saying it's the only place, and we'll talk about other research opportunities. But grants.gov is certainly where I head first, especially if you're interested in federal funding, because it is a clearinghouse that has everything, every federal grant funding opportunity. Okay. It's not going to have state, it's not going to have foundation, but it's going to have all of the federal sites. And so their website is nice and easy, www.grants.gov. When you click on that search grants button that was circled on the previous slide, it's going to take you right into the actual search engine. Okay. And we're going to take it for a spin, because this is one of those webinars where I could tell you about it, but I think it's going to be more helpful if we actually play around in the site. So let me.
Hey,
give me
Amanda,
one
while you're doing that, can I just let them know something right quick while you're pulling it? So as you may remember, if you were there for our webinar where we talked about how to register for federal grants, it's the same site, but we're not talking about registering for a grant and submitting a grant. We're talking about looking for a grant. And to look for a grant, to just search grants, you don't actually have to have already set up an account. If you want to get those push notifications every day about grant opportunities each day, there are new federal grant opportunities that come out, and you can get that. I think you do have to set up like an email account to receive that information, but you can just go on and look at this from your phone if that is what you would like to do. So just wanted to point out the differences. So take it away.
So can you see the grants.gov website on your screen? Okay, making sure that's it. So here we're back to the homepage, grants.gov. So again, at the top, you just click search grants. And what it's going to pop up is you see here, hopefully you can see where I'm moving my mouse around. Right now, there are 2,534 federal opportunities. And I'm saying opportunities because it could be a grant, but it could also be a procurement contract. It could be a cooperative agreement. If you've not heard cooperative agreement before, they're kind of like a grant. Oftentimes it's, hey, we'll fund these types of projects. This is how many grants our awards we're giving. This is how much money you can ask for. The difference is with a cooperative agreement, that agency is going to be more involved than they are with a grant. So they may provide the evaluation component, or they may require you to do certain things. So I will say, you can certainly look for grants, but you also want to check out cooperative agreements because they're very grant-esque, and that could be a way to get some things funded as well. So clearly, you don't want to sit here and have to read through over 2,500 funding opportunities. Okay, so on the left is ways for you to narrow your search. So you can see here, you can narrow it by instrument type. So if I just want grants only, if I click on that, now look, I'm down to about 1,700 funding opportunities. You can narrow what type of agency are you. So since we mostly have cities, I'm going to click cities. Look, now we're down to 916 available funding opportunities. You can narrow it further by category. And as you can see here, it's got all kinds of things: disaster prevention, education, energy, environment, so on and so forth. You can narrow it by agency. If you specifically are like, I think I need a grant from the Department of Agriculture, you could click that, and that's going to narrow it down as well. Other ways you can narrow your search is you can put in keywords. So if you know, I am interested in maybe body cameras for our police department, I can hit that and then hit search. And look, there's now potentially 356 funding opportunities. Now, it did unclick all the other things I did. This is just for body cameras. So you can, again, narrow it more by coming and clicking, it's a grant, it's for a city. Look, now I'm down to 48. That's much more manageable. So if any of these look like something you're interested in, and the title sometimes can give things away, right? This is feasibility clinical trials. And you're like, no, I'm not doing trials. I just want to order the equipment, right? So you may be able to just from the title suss out whether or not these are things that will be a fit for what I'm doing. If you're not sure about anything, again, you can just, let me see, one that may, a lot of these, you can see here, it's through Health and Human Services. There's one through United States Department of Agriculture. So here's a community facilities program disaster repair grants. So if we're interested in that, we just click on this link here, and it's going to tell me some information about it, right? So it's a discretionary grant. I think we talked a week or two ago, there's formula grants where it's based on a formula. Discretionary are those competitive grants. They expect to give 30 awards. There is a cost match required. It was posted July 26th. The closing date, usually they'll have a date here. Instead, they're giving you some information. It's a continuous basis grant. Okay. You can get between 10 and $50 million is the total. That's the total program funding. Sorry, it's 50 million. But it says 1 to 10. I'm guessing that should probably be million, not that. I would never go for a grant for $10. So I'm guessing this is incorrect. But it tells you who's eligible and gives you more information. So if you want more information about it, you can poke around and check it out. If like, I'm not ready for this right now, but maybe next year, what Kimberly talked about, where you can get notices, you can click here on subscribe. And anytime something new happens with this particular grant opportunity, you will get an email as long as you're registered with grants.gov, which if you hit subscribe, it'll make you do all of that stuff, right? If you haven't done it yet. That way you can find out about it. Okay. So that's just kind of a quick down and dirty to kind of let you know how to poke around here. And it's one of those things, the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it, the more you can help narrow your search so you're not reading a ton of things that don't match. And I will tell you too, one other thing, opportunity status, there's 4 options. So posted, that means it is live. The funder says, hey, here's a grant opportunity. Here's the application and here's the deadline. Okay. So that's something you're like, oh, we got to get on top of this. Forecasted means it's coming out soon, whether it's tomorrow or within 30 days, but they probably have enough information that they're starting to push that out. That's helpful because you have a little bit more time, right? Because federal funders are required by law to give you 30 days notice before a grant is due. That's why a lot of deadlines, it'll be posted on, may say on January 1st and the deadline's February 1st. They've given you that 30-day notice. That's all they have to give you. Some of them are kind and give 45 or 60 days, but a lot of them it's 30 days. So there's that. Closed, that means it's already happened this fiscal year. And remember, federal fiscal year starts on October 1st. So if you're like, I know there's a grant that does this, why is it not coming up? It could be it already happened this year. So you could come over here and click closed and you may be able to find it that way. Archived means it was not funded this year, but maybe it was funded either last year or the year before it or 20 years ago, right? So if you're like, I remember 10 years ago, I wrote this grant when I worked for this city. This is the name of it. Why am I not finding it? You may want to come and click archived and you may be able to find it. And it may be one of those things that the funding ran out and they just never refunded that bill or that funding source again. So, but that's kind of just a real quick, if you've never been on grants.gov. So it's fabulous because it's every federal grant all in one place. It's also overwhelming because it's every federal grant all in one place. And sometimes you can feel like, okay, Amanda, I've been searching for 10 days straight, haven't found anything. You said everything's on here. I know there's got to be funding. It can feel like you're looking for a needle in a haystack, even with all the handy ways to narrow your search, because there just really is a lot of stuff out there. Okay. So even though a lot of people, this is their go-to for research, sometimes it's not always the best place to start. So if you find yourself on here and not finding what you need and feeling overwhelmed, it's okay. This is why we're going to show you other ways to do some research. Okay. Before I leave grants.gov though, I do want to show you. So we looked how you can find grants that you subscribe to that individual grant. But if you want more grant subscription stuff, if you come over here to the connect button, it says manage subscriptions. You want to click on that. And you can see here, you can create custom email notifications. So I subscribe to all new grant opportunities. So that means I get 1 email a day from grants.gov, and any new grant that was posted within the system, it's in 1 email. And it's just a few lines about, it's usually the title of it, the name of the funder, maybe a quick description. And then there's a link if I want to click to get to more information. I like that because I can very quickly look at that and go, yep, has nothing to do with what I'm doing. Or, ooh, this is promising, let me click. So that's an option. You can subscribe to certain opportunities. That's the one I was showing you where you click directly from when you found the grant opportunity. You can also subscribe to save searches. So if you're like, I really have to have funding for body cameras, so I could do a search that's body cameras for cities from this funder, for whatever I click, I can save that search. And so anytime something new appears that meets those parameters, I will get an email about it. So it's a handy way for it to, instead of you having to go look, it's telling you, hey, the thing you're looking for may be here. So, and if you get tired of it all, you can certainly unsubscribe, but that's how that works. One other thing I do want to show you on Search Grants too. One of the ways you can look up opportunity numbers is by CFDA. If you haven't heard of that before, CFDA is the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. There used to be a CFDA.gov website. They've kind of now integrated a lot of things together. So there's not a separate website for it. But basically, every federal funding opportunity has a CFDA number. It's always 5 digits. It's always 2 numbers with a period and then 3 more numbers. And those first 2 numbers are associated with the funding agency. So 16 is the Department of Justice. I think HUD is 14. Okay, so any grant that starts 14 as its number, I know is going to be a grant from HUD. And then the last three numbers go back to that very particular grant opportunity. So let me just show you. I'm just going to grab one of these. Okay, so you can see here the CFDA number is 66951. Okay, so if this is a grant I was interested in, but I'm like, I could subscribe to it as an option, but I could also jot that number down. And later, if I want to find it again, instead of having to remember how I got to it, I can just go back. What did I say? 66951. I can go back to this page here, and on CFDA, I can type in 66.951 and hit search. And there it is. And there may be multiple. So you can see here, it's all the same grant, but it's just for different regions across the country. So I need to know which region I was in to be able to click on the right one. But there it is. There's that 66951. That's that same one. So that can be helpful if somebody tells you, hey, there's this incredible grant you should go for, and they tell you the name of it, and you're like, I can't find that anywhere. You could always say, hey, what's the CFDA number? And if they can tell you that, that's a really quick way for you to be able to go and find it. Because, you know, the names of things, sometimes they're long, sometimes they get changed, but that number should be the same today, tomorrow, 20 years from now, 20 years ago, all should be the same. So that is kind of a quick down and dirty of grants.gov. Okay. If you'll give me 1 second, I am going to pull our slideshow back up. Sorry, I know it always takes a minute to go back and forth, but I wanted to make sure that you all saw all of this. Okay.
Amanda, while you're doing that, I just want to remind folks, if they do have questions about this, or just grant research in general, pop them in the Q&A or put it in the, put something in the chat too. Y'all are awfully quiet today, so we want to make sure you know we're here live to answer your questions if you have them, or if you have search tips that we don't talk about, put them in the, put them in the chat so we can all learn from each other.
Absolutely. So hopefully we've got the screen back up.
Oh, while you're, Julie has a question in the Q&A. You want me to read it out to you, Amanda?
Please.
So thank you, Julie, for your question. If your city does not have funds available to match or cost share, does that make the grant unavailable?
Well, yes and no. So ultimately, yes, if you can't come up with some sort of match, then yeah, they're not, well, as a general rule, yes. But let me give you some caveats and stuff here. Number one, it depends why your match is not available, right? If, let's just say, a hurricane has come through and horribly decimated your community, you could probably call up that funder and say, hey, we're interested in this grant, but this is who we are. This is what's been going on. We don't have an extra penny for everything, but we desperately need this funding. That funder has the opportunity to waive the match requirement. Okay. So, and I say that, don't think you can just be like, we just don't have money. There's going to have to be some very extenuating circumstances. Like I'm sure after Katrina, city of New Orleans probably was not doing matching grant stuff because that city was, really bad off. So there is that. But also I would say to encourage too, when it comes to grant applications, you don't always have to apply on your own, right? There may be another city, a nonprofit, a university. It may make sense for you to go in with another agency, and maybe what they're bringing to the table is the match, but what you're bringing to the table is the knowledge and the know-how to get the grant, to manage the grant. Because that's, even though it's not costing you money, it still is costing you money because of the time and the effort of your staff that are doing all of these things. So it is quite possible that you could partner with other agencies who are maybe have a little extra cash that they'd be willing to pay that in return for you guys doing some other work as part of the project. So anything else you want to add as far as that goes, Kimberly?
I also added in the chat that each grant is going to be very specific about what their match or cost share requirements are. And sometimes it's not just cash. So
Yes.
I wish we could wave a wand and go, it's always this, it's always 20%, it's always 1-to-1, it's not. So looking to see how they define for that one grant the actual match amount or cost share amount? And do they define that as a cash amount? Or can it be staff or other things, other forms of revenue, or other kinds of services or equipment or whatever it might be? That's why it's so important to really dig into that. And usually the cost share / match information in an RFP or a NOFO or an OFA, all of which are acronyms for the Grant and Manual Instruction Guide. It's going to outline that somewhere within those first 5 to 10 pages, usually sooner rather than later. That we're going to be really clear about that. So it just depends. As Claire's pointing out, there are as I said, there's some in-kind services that can be part of match. Another important thing is to note that for most grants, there are a couple of exceptions, but for most federal grants or state grants that are passed through, you can't use another federal grant as a match. So just know that. So the answer isn't unequivocally no, but it's not like, oh yeah, no match, no problem. So it's going to vary by each grant opportunity.
Yep.
But that was a good question.
That's a good thing. You know, if you're eligible for some foundation or corporate funding, you may be able to leverage that as the match. You know, if you pitch to, you know, like we've used Target to help pay for national night out events before. And so if Target's giving us $5,000 to help with that, and we found this other federal grant that could make the program even bigger and better, and our match would be $5,000, where we could leverage that $5,000 grant from Target as the match to that federal grant, because that's a corporate funding source, right? Not a federal grant. But it's, you know, that starts to get complicated because you've got to keep up with all that, and you've got to make sure you're following all the rules for all the grants and all the things, but it is certainly a way to help make that happen. So, okay. Let's paying attention to the time here. So let's talk about other ways to do grant research. So every federal agency is going to, or department, whatever you want to call it, they're all going to have websites. And so you can go directly to those websites to find grant opportunities on their page. So if you are, you know, looking for a grant for public safety, especially for police, chances are what you're looking for is through the Department of Justice, right? So rather than going to grants.gov and weeding through everything else, it may be easier to start with the Department of Justice website and see what's on there. But I will say, don't limit yourself to that, because I know that there are grants through the Department of Education, especially if you are doing like school resource officers or programs involving school-age children. There could be grants for your police department through the Department of Education. Also, Health and Human Services. They are the largest federally funded agency, okay? Health and Human Services. And they do grants that are related to public safety things, particularly when it comes to things involving mental illness, substance abuse, and things like that. So if your program is centered around those types of activities, you certainly start Department of Justice, but you may want to mosey on over to Health and Human Services. So grants.gov is nice because it's everything, so you won't miss out on things. If you just focus only on one agency, you may miss out on a funding opportunity that might be a better fit for your program, but there's nothing wrong with going directly to those agencies. And no, there are, I think there are 26 federal departments.
Like the
big ones, yeah. But they also have sub-agencies, right?
They're like 175 plus sub agencies and departments that make grants. That's a lot.
Yeah. So, you know, Department of Department of Homeland Security, one of the sub agencies is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is where if you are looking for grants for your fire department, they're probably one of the biggest funders of grants for the fire department. They have 3 really big grant programs for that. But again, also Department of Agriculture, if you are in a more rural community, they give grants for fire departments as well. So that's one of those things that you would not think, oh, fire department, Department of Agriculture, perfect fit, but there actually is. So you can certainly go to their websites and poke around. If you've never, like, you don't even know what all the different departments are, we've got links there at the bottom for places where you can go and see a listing of all the different agencies. Now, they don't all give grant awards. Okay. There are certainly some agencies that are, you know, their job is something like the General Services Administration. They're in charge of setting rules for different things. They're probably not giving grant funding, but they are a federal agency. Okay.
I would also add, Amanda, sometimes it'll surprise you. several years ago, I got a grant from the IRS, and you're like, what? But it was to help people enroll into federal benefits programs, which was closely tied to the work that a food bank was doing, right? To sort of give people emergency food, but then also help them stretch their budgets with programs to which they were already entitled to. So
Yep.
just know it can surprise you. It can surprise you what those grants could be.
Absolutely. I'm going to go real quick, but I just want to show you when you start doing your research on federal websites, it's not like, oh, every federal website, it works like this because they're all different how they set it up. So I just wanted to show you two examples. So this is Department of Justice. Their website is justice.gov. They very kindly have grants front and center as one of their drop-down menus. I love websites who do that. It's like they're thinking of us grant people. Okay, so you click on that and you start scrolling down and they're letting you know, hey, this is our portal. Remember the other day we talked about registering for things? So if you know you're going to be going for grants from Department of Justice and you've never checked out Just Grants, their online portal, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and get signed up, and because that could take some time. They have some different information. Okay, so I will say that, you know, anytime you're writing a grant, part of your need statement, which we'll talk about when we get to the writing part, you want to be able to show that there is a need for something, which it usually includes data and information that's tried and true. Well, hello, Department of Justice probably knows a thing or two about mass violence incidents. So there could be in this, you know, link right here, lots of data and information that may be helpful for you to regurgitate when it comes to you talking about a program that is aligned with this. So not only is this, the federal website's a great place for grant research, it's also a great place just for data mining and things like that. Okay. But you'll see here through Department of Justice, they have multiple agencies that give grant programs. So I would, if this is up your wheelhouse, I'd start clicking on all of these and seeing what they are, right? So let's just real quick, Bureau of Justice Assistance. They've got a quick video you can watch. If you're new to submitting grants for them, highly recommend you check that out. But right here, handy on the right-hand side, available funding. Awesome. So here we have, right now, there's just one, which is not surprising. Most Department of Justice grants, a lot of them are due in May. So we're past all of that. But this one is, it closes September 14th. That's today. So that we're too late. Don't think, oh, I'll get this. No, we're not doing this. But if you're interested, you click and it takes you right to the guidelines. But what I like about theirs too is you can look on past funding. So here's all the ones. There's at least three pages worth, right? So if any of these are things that you're like, ooh, that's residential substance abuse treatment for state prisoners program. If that's you, if you're, I forget, what's the city where we have the big state prison here in Georgia? I can't remember. But anyway, if that's you and you're like, this is exactly what we need. What's that?
It might be Jackson. Oh, wait, maybe Jackson.
It might. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is in Jackson, Butts County, maybe.
Let me know if I got it wrong. Let me know in the comments.
Yeah.
I'm here to learn.
Anyway, I don't think it's in the city. I think it's in Butts County, but I think you're right. But anyway, so you missed this, right? It was due August 14th, but most federal grants come out about the same time every year. So if this is a program that they're going to have happen next year, you can get ahead of the curve. You can go ahead and download all the information about it and start thinking about what's the data they're asking for, how big is the budget, what will they fund, what will they not fund, and you could start putting together a program that would fit this. So when it comes out next year, probably around June, you're already ahead of the curve. And so even though you're like, dang it, I missed it by a month, actually, I look at it as I'm 11 months ahead of schedule for next year, right? So this could be a great way to do research. I want to show you real quick one other site, HUD, Housing and Urban Development. They don't have grants front and center, right? So this is one of those you may have to poke around a little bit. If memory serves, I think if we click on what we do, and then I'm pretty sure, yep, working with HUD, here's the grants page. So you can click there. So it may take a little bit to find what you're looking for. And here they're basically telling you, you can find our grants on grants.gov, or you can look at our funding opportunities page. So here it is. And again, kind of the same thing. Here's listing all of Oh, that's just some helpful information at the top. So here's all of their funding opportunities for 2023. If any of these look like something you're interested in, so here's a Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant. You click on it and it gives you information about it. And again, you can see here, this was due June 6th. So again, we missed it, but you can plan ahead for next year. I do know HUD usually posts all their stuff at the beginning of the fiscal year. And so this is one of those things, like if every grant I'm interested in is already passed, I'm probably going to come back here in October and start seeing what their next fiscal year's grant cycle is going to be. One other thing about HUD, let me go back 2 pages here. Award announcements. Some funders will tell you who they gave the grants to, which can be uber helpful, because if you know, I want to go for this grant, if you can see who won it last year, if you know any of those folks, or even if you don't, you can pick up the phone and call, hey, I saw you got this grant last year. Any chance you'd be willing to share that information with me? HUD does it, but they haven't updated it since 2014. So maybe if you know a HUD person, you could suggest they update this page. So it could be really helpful. Some funders really do share that information, but not all of them. So, but I just wanted to show, again, not every site is the same, but going directly to the sites sometimes is not as overwhelming as going to grants.gov. So that may be a way you want to do your research. Let me get back to my slides here. And don't forget, we've talked a lot about Fed stuff, but a lot of federal funding goes to state agencies, and then our state departments will open it up to cities and counties to be able to apply for grants that way. So did I go too far? So don't forget our different state agencies. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just ones I pulled out that I think you all might be interested in, but that link at the bottom has the list of every state agency. And it's kind of the same thing. There's no grants.gov version for the state of Georgia. I wish there was. I have called a few of our state representatives and suggest they build one of these, and they aren't taking me seriously at this point in time. So I guess I'll just keep hounding them until someone does it. But there is no central clearinghouse for state funded grants. So you have to go agency by agency to see what's there. Some of their websites are fabulous and lovely. Some of them, it's hard to find stuff. And so what I have found is usually at the state level is most helpful is to call up, and even if it's just their main line, and just say, hey, who's your main point of contact for grants for your agency? And can I talk to them? And I'll just kind of explain who I am, what I'm doing. Sometimes they'll get you signed up for newsletters. Sometimes they'll add you to their mailing list. You know, sometimes they can say, oh yeah, it's kind of buried here. Let me point you, let me send you the link. Here it is. If you go here, you can find everything, right? So your mileage is going to vary from funder to funder when it comes here. But I will tell you, when I worked for the city of Alpharetta, we got a ton of federal funding, but the majority of the federal funding we got went to a state agency first before it came to us. I went to the feds directly occasionally, but more often than not, it was funding we got from the Georgia Department of Transportation or the Georgia Emergency Management Agency that was federal funding that they then subawarded to us. So if you're new to this game, state applications tend to not be quite as cumbersome as federal ones. So I highly recommend, if you're new to this, start here before you start going directly to the feds, because then too, you're only competing against your state versus the entire country. So other agencies to consider, larger counties tend to do grant funding. I know Fulton County, DeKalb County, these are just Cobb County. I know just this, I'm in the metro Atlanta area, so I know that, but other larger counties sometimes do grants. So if you're a city, you may be eligible for some of their funds. Your Georgia Association of Regional Commissions often get federal money that they then pass down. I've gotten plenty of grants to the Atlanta Regional Commission, which if you're in the metro Atlanta area, that is your regional commission that you would go to for sources. So I've got the map shown here. So if you're not sure, and I know we have a few regional commission representatives on the call today. So those are people that can help you find out what types of grant funding they do. Oftentimes it's related to transportation, aging type projects. What's that?
Economic development projects, could be
things like that.
tourism. It depends on
Yep, absolutely. Those are kind of the types of things that they tend to pass money through for. And then I will say too, you know, for cities, we're eligible for a lot of federal and state grant funding. we're not as eligible for a lot of foundation and corporate funding, but we still are for some. So most of that money goes to 501c3 nonprofits, which as a local government, we are not that, but there certainly are some exceptions. And so ways you can do foundation research. Foundation Directory Online is a paid subscription to access information about foundations, but they have what they call a funding information network. And I've got the link there on the page. And usually it's local libraries. And so that's how, when I first started grant consulting, I was like, I don't know if I want to pay for this. So I would just go to it was the Roswell Library had it at the time. And so I would just go and sit on the library computer and do my work there. So it's like grants.gov and the fact that it's a database system where you plug in your, search, customize your search, and it starts matching you with potential funders. So that's one way. Other foundation subscriptions, Instrumental, they have a 4-day trial. So if you wanted to give it a whirl for free, I've used that. 14 day. Yes. Thank you. GuideStar, you can access limited data for free. If you want a more robust search engine, you have to pay for it. The IRS, which I've given you the link directly to the page where you can do research. There's not a lot of search engine parameters you can put in, but it's free. So that's an option as well. Now, ways some communities improve their eligibility, because again, as cities, we're not eligible for a lot of these foundations, is forming your own 501c3 nonprofit. The Atlanta Police Foundation is an example. I'm here, my husband used to work for the city of Woodstock, and when they did like a 6-month in-depth study of trails. It got community involvement, and a lot of the members of the community who got real jazzed up about trails in the city, those citizens formed a 501c3 nonprofit called Green Prince Alliance. And they are looking for that side of the funding coin to help implement the city's green trail plans. And so it's not necessarily a city organization, but they work hand in hand. And it's citizens started that. So I'm not saying, hey, go start your own nonprofit, because you probably don't have time to do that, is what I'm saying. But if you have a lot of interested and engaged citizens who keep going, how can we help? How can we help? Maybe forming some sort of foundation could be helpful with that. And then they could apply for grant funding for programs that you're doing, and they'll eligible when you're not, right? Another option, which I've done a lot, is just partner with a 501c3. Okay. I tried to fund it was a summer camp for children with disabilities. We found the perfect grant, but we were not eligible. So we partnered with a nonprofit that works with the same clientele. And we went in together to be able to help fund camp, and they were the lead applicant. And we knew them really well. So we just came together, split up, like, hey, I'll do this, you do this, this is how it's going to work. And we did that for years on end, partnering with them to make it happen. So if you find that perfect grant and you're like, man, this would be great, but I'm not eligible, that may be a way to make it happen. So I feel like I went through it. I see there's some questions in the chat. Do we want to tackle those real quick before we change?
There's a question about stormwater based grants, and I recommended that Kristen also it's true that there's a lot of federal funding that comes through state agencies. That's completely true. But the unique difference right now is there is a lot of money through BIL, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and also other funds through the IRA Inflation Recovery Act, that could be good places to look, because there's a whole big focus area on water and sanitation. So I would add that to your search, Kristen, in addition to state and maybe regional commission kinds of things. Amanda, is there anything else you want to add?
Well, and I will tell you, stormwater is one of those things that it's like, it is so vital and necessary, but it's not. Like, I remember I used to work with our stormwater engineer. She's like, I hate presenting to council because nobody finds stormwater sexy. Unless there's a flood, they don't want to hear anything about it, right? And so she was like, it's so hard to get funding for this type of projects. And I know when I was there, I think it was Alpharetta and Roswell and Sandy Springs, maybe Milton and Johns Creek. Several of us cities came together and pulled our resources, and we hired a lobbyist to lobby for some needs for stormwater, and that ended up in us getting federal funding to help pay for some of our projects. So it wasn't a grant per se, and we had to put a little money up front to pay for a lobbyist. And I'm not saying that's the only route to go, but I'm saying that's a way that we were able to get some needed infrastructure funds to our community, is by doing that. So while Kimberly's talking, Kristen, I'm happy to send you an email address or two of people in the city of Alpharetta that were involved in that. If you want to reach out, and feel free to tell them I sent them your way, and they can probably tell you more about it than me. But also, the Georgia Environmental Protection Division has grants related to water type projects as well. So you may call them, and they're super helpful. Like, they'll meet with you, you can talk them through the projects, and they can say, yeah, this would be a good fit, or no, this wouldn't. So highly recommend, if you have not reached out to the Georgia EPD, that you may want to do that as well.
So if you're looking at, you've identified some grant opportunities, sort of what are your next steps? And so what I wanted to do in the next, I would say the next 3 slides to sort of close this out today, is go through, I kind of call this my thought process, only I'm going to talk you through my thought process about the things I look for when I'm evaluating a grant. Because just because my employer or my client is eligible doesn't mean it's the best fit. It's I want to just have us come around some strategic thinking skills, and I wanted to break down how I do it, and Amanda, I think, has a similar process as well. So obvious, the number one thing, if you found your grant either through the state of Georgia or through the regional commission or through grants.gov or through BIL or IRA special emails, whatever it is, go get the entire RFP or NOFO or FOA. Those are all acronyms that are talking about the instruction manual for the grant, right? And if it's a federal grant or state grant, it's probably going to be anywhere from 20 to 100 pages, depending on the complexity of the grant. Become the subject matter expert on that grant, because a lot of times people might forward you grant opportunities and they just might look at the title of the grant. And then when you get into it, I think that ties to the question earlier. It's like, yeah, they want a 1-to-1 match, which means every dollar you put in, every dollar you were asking for, you have to put in. And the person that's forwarding that grant may not have gotten that far. So a lot of times it's well-meaning people who are busy and are sending stuff your way. So if you go in and follow these basic steps, you can find out whether you're eligible for the grant, which is job one, right? If they require a cash match and you do not have qualifying cash, you got to be this tall to ride this ride. So that's how tall you got to be. With no matching cash, it's a no-go. But also, you want to look at what's the likelihood that you would get this grant. If you were a city that has a super healthy tax base and doesn't have a huge community of people in need, like your project is not going to serve 40% of your project will not benefit people who are of low income or live in environmentally substandard areas, then you're probably not going to be a good fit for BIL funding. If you think back to our first webinar where we talked about that Justice 40 that's a part of BIL and IRA funding, federal funding, is all about your projects need to benefit at least 40% of the total population that you're benefiting needs to be what they would call disadvantaged communities. So if it's all focused on that and you know you don't have the 40%, either it's a no-go or you're partnering with another area that meets that, and together y'all are moving forward with the project. I'm hoping that these will illustrate the difference between, yeah, we're eligible, but are we competitive? Another way to look at this, we had a recent webinar about getting grant ready, where we had all sorts of documentation lists and all those things to get you ready. But it's so important to have that understood by everyone, that it's not just a matter of filling out a form. There are some federal grants that are just around equipment, and it's usually sort of in that firefighter, first responder kind of category. But for most big projects, construction projects, big community projects, you're going to need to have a lot of documentation. And the other thing to figure out is your city or your county, your municipality, do you have the people and systems in place to manage the grant? Because managing a large scale federal grant is going to, they're going to usually ask for all sorts of reporting. You're going to need to often do the work first and then get reimbursed. That may not be something that the person who is forwarding you these opportunities even knew about. And so if you can go in and get down and say, yes, this is going to be, do we have $500,000 to do the work first and get reimbursed on a monthly or quarterly basis as we're doing this? That's an important step. So once I've sort of gone through those big picture questions, then I have the next 2 slides are a series of questions about guidelines to guide my thinking process into whether or not this is truly the right fit. So I am deadline oriented. Y'all have been writing grants for a long time. And it's like, if the deadline, like Amanda pulled up one that was due today. Yeah. I mean, if you've never applied for a federal grant and it's due today, I'm saying no. I'm saying you're supposed to get 30 days notice. And I would say every particle of those 30 days, if you've never written federal grants before, needs to go into that prep. If it's due in 2 days, unless it's a very, very straightforward equipment ask where you already have all the information and you're registered, it's on sam.gov and grants.gov and login.gov, as we talked about in an earlier webinar. That's a no-fly for me. Obviously, we've talked about, are you eligible? Are there any pre-application registration requirements? Do you need to sign up to go to this training webinar? Do you need to provide a sort of a letter of intent kind of application? I want to pause and tell you there's a big thunderstorm popping outside here. So I'm going to keep going, but Amanda, if the power goes, just power on through.
Will do.
Also, you want to make sure and review what are the eligible activities. Again, that's usually something that's going to be in the first few pages of this larger document. If what they pay for is not what you need, or they won't pay, another way to look at that, that grant is not paying for what you need. If it's only for equipment and you need to hire people, that's not a good fit. That's not a good fit. You also want to look at minimum and maximum funding limits. If the federal grants, as I've said, require a lot, and state grants require a lot of reporting and documentation. A $20,000 grant that might cost you $13,000 or $14,000 in personnel costs, if you will, to manage the grant, may not be the best fit. So understanding what those requirements are, can you manage them? Understanding, is it enough money to really make a difference for the amount of admin that goes in supporting you post-award? We already talked about required match. I want to find out which different agencies have different portals, and I'm talking of the federal government and the state of Georgia. Different agencies also have different portals. Should it all be in the same portal in grants.gov? Yep. Is it? No. So just know that, and know that that might require some extra time. So if it's a week away, it's like, if you've not registered, do you have time to make all those things happen? Then I'm also wanting to look at what are the formatting guidelines. What does it look like? What are the kinds of things that they're asking for? So if we go on, in the interest of time, to the next slide, and again, this is me just looking at a grant. Obviously, I don't talk out loud to myself and take 10 minutes talking it through. I'm just checking. I'm checking. Next up, what is the time allowable for completing the project? And another way you might see this question is, what is the grant period, the grant cycle period? Because if you need the project now, and this funding won't start until mid-2024, not a good fit, right? Other not smaller, but other things I want to check out is, do they have someone where I can ask questions? Because I always have questions, and I want to know what that is. And I also want to know, getting back to what I said about admin requirements, what are the reporting requirements? Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? What is involved? What are they looking for? And that they're going to be outlining that in the document as well. How's your agency going to get paid for this? Is it like, are we looking at doing all the work and then getting paid at the end? Or is there a way to do monthly and quarterly, which is usually the case? And but it can vary within a single agency from grant to grant, which is why I'm bringing that out for you. When will the grants be awarded? Again, tying back to, does the work we need match up with the grant cycle, right? And if there are particular signatures or resolutions that where you need to provide proof of that is a really good thing to know, because you've got to measure accessibility to the people that need to sign off on this versus when is the grant due and how is that going to happen. So further in the process, I'm like, are there any required attachments other than the normal ones? You know, are they asking for something that I know we don't have and I need to get it? Who can sign off on the application? And then is there a required workshop? If any agency gives any kind of workshop, I'm going to go required or not, or I'm going to watch the recording later, because you're going to learn something. If you can get on there live, just like we're doing today, you can ask those questions and get them answered real time. And sometimes I've gone on to find out that while I thought my client might be eligible, found out that they weren't. Asked the question twice, documented it in the chat, cut and pasted, and took it back, because that's, again, if you are not eligible, if there's a question that wasn't fully answered or explained, let's find out about it at the get-go. So you're not spinning your wheels and all that time putting together a really nice proposal is going to get knocked out on a technicality, basically. So that's a whirlwind of my thought process. But again, I think it's a really important thing to go through and ask yourself those questions. And then that gives you the knowledge and the confidence to say, this is a great idea, or this is not a great idea for us, and here's why. Or maybe this is, we're going to do this next year because now we have 11 months that we can get ready and make this a really competitive grant. So with that being said, we are at 1:58. Amanda and I have the Fundraising Heyday podcast. It's free. You can find it on our website, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. 30 to 45 minutes on different topics. And we pull together some topics about prospect research that might be of interest to you. And finally, as we move forward, I'm checking the chat and the Q&A, but I just wanted to highlight, you'll also be receiving all of the slides, and then a resource guide where we're walking you through with some links of different places, different agencies to go, different things to check out. There's some specific resources for rural communities versus urban communities when it comes to overall applying for federal and state funding. So we hope you find that super helpful. And as always, you can drop us a line at hello@heydayservices.com, but we would be remiss if we did not tell you that you have a wonderful resource in GMA. And they have that calendar. It's also in your handout, the 4 seasons of grants, where you can go and see. That's another great place to go and look and see what grants are out that may be applicable to you, in addition to all kinds of grant readiness resources.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, Kimberly, as you're thinking about reading the RFP and trying to decide, how do I decide, like, we checked some of these boxes, but we don't, like, how do I decide whether or not this is a perfect grant for us or not? If you go to our website, heydayservices.com, and on the very front homepage, we have a free download called the Go No Go Decision Making Guide. And it's just a 2-page document where you can answer some questions based on the RFP you've just read to help you determine whether or not that's a good fit for you. So, because sometimes getting your thoughts out on paper and looking at the totality of things make it easier than you just reading it going, I don't know. And that gives you talking points when you go to your boss or your board, when they're like, well, why didn't you go for this grant? You've got 2 pages of notes to be able to say, because we didn't meet this requirement, and this wasn't a match, and this wasn't a match, so it wasn't a good fit. So if that's helpful to you, it's on our website. It's free. Help yourself.
So thanks again. We look forward to seeing you. We've got 8 more hours of power to go to help you get ready for all things grant.
which includes more ways to do grant resource search. So we've got some other tips and tricks to share in the future.
I just want to say thank you everyone for joining today. I know people are already exiting, but thank you, Amanda and Kimberly. We can't say it enough how much we appreciate you guys bringing your expertise to our members. I guess until next time.